let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
This is so
We
awesome.
are an open culture that believes
actually
in
a big piece
importance
of
of
What is that process that a developer, or let's say
As the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed,
Hello and welcome to this week's and this year's first Ask an OpenShift Admin office hours. Welcome to everyone in our audience. I am Andrew Sullivan, the co-host with Mr. Johnny Rickard. How are you today, sir?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I just noticed our names are not showing up in here. Let's turn that on. Let's see here. There we go. Now I can remember who you are because it's been like, I don't know, a month of Sundays since we did one.
I know. It's been a long time. Yes, a very long time.
So yeah, holidays and all those other things, they get in the way. And last week we had we were planning on doing a stream, and then turns out that we were overlapping with the what's new for OpenShift 4.12. So serendipitously, that kind of works out for us, right? Because
Right.
this week's topic is exactly that. So yeah, lots of exciting stuff going on. And I'll go ahead and apologize now for anyone who can hear all of the noise that's happening in the background here. There's some folks doing some work on the house. That's why I'm in a different room than I was in 2022, as well as there's a bunch of noise going on. Oscillating
too bad.
tools and dogs barking and just all kinds of other stuff going on. So, next it'll
Yeah,
be
man.
children crying in the background,
Yeah,
say-
if we're lucky.
Yeah, well, I say that none of my children are home. Well, the oldest is, but he's 15. I hope he's not. So, anyways, thank you for the confirmation, Dave. Yeah, I hope it's not distracting. I hope it won't last too long either. But yeah, I got no control over it. So, Dwayne, Happy New Year. Yeah, it's 2023 kicking off with a bang, so to speak. Proverbially and literally, all the banging going on around here. But we're 2 weeks in, just over 2 weeks in. We've already got OpenShift 4.12 out the door. It shipped GA yesterday, so we quick turnaround. Sometimes we do those what's new, and it's another month or 5 weeks before it goes out the door, and sometimes it's literally the next week.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised when I was putting all the stuff together for the social media, and I was like, oh man, it's already out. That's crazy because I was expecting it to be like at least another week or so. But yeah, it was really quick. So they were ready.
Yeah, well, and it's funny because a lot of times we'll get asked, oh, when is it going to ship? When does it go out the door? And my response, and I'm sure I've said this on the stream before, of it's always until it's literally out the door, like on the mirrors, ready to download. It can always slip, and I've seen it happen where just hours before it's supposed to ship, they'll find an issue. And they have to push out by I think the minimum is I'm trying to remember, it's several days, because it takes so long for like a full QE cycle to happen, and then after that it takes some time for the build to happen, and then after that it takes time to actually push everything out to all of the mirrors. It's like a 12-hour process. Just like everything's good, all of the bits are built, everything, like let's just put it on the mirrors, like to get it replicated and made available everywhere is like an hours long process. I didn't know that until recently. So all the magic that happens behind the scenes.
That's right.
Yeah,
it's just available though, right? It's just that's the beauty of it. It's just there for us, and we don't have to worry about all the pain that goes into it. So
well, I saw I don't know if it was Monday or Tuesday this week, if you look at status.redhat.com, there was some issues with the registry. So I saw some folks were having issues with that, where I can't deploy, or my deploy fails. Well, yeah, because it can't pull container images. So
yeah.
But anyways, before I get too distracted here by our topic today, so this is a office hours live stream here on Red Hat live streaming, which means that Johnny and I are here for you, for our audience. So we're here to answer questions. We're here to talk about OpenShift, all of the things that are going on in OpenShift, and anything that happens to be top of your mind. So we we almost always have a topic that we'll talk about here during the stream, but don't let that limit the questions that are on your mind. Anything that you're curious about, anything you want to ask about, any of that type of stuff, feel free to, type a question here in chat. We see, regardless of which platform you're watching us on, whether you're on YouTube, whether you're on Twitch, etc., we see all of the chat coming into our interface here. So you can always reach out, always ask those questions, and that includes if you are not live. Lots of folks watch us, watch the recording, or maybe you're listening to us in the car or something like that, podcast like. You're welcome to reach out to us after the fact as well. So if I can find the right button here, you can reach out. The easiest way to reach both Johnny and I is probably email. So you can find me at andrew.sullivan@redhat.com. Super easy, first name dot last name in that respect. I will say email comes in waves. So sometimes I'm able to get to email quickly. Sometimes it'll take me a little bit of time to churn through them. Also on social media, all the various places at Practical Andrew. I will admit that Twitter is not my favorite platform these days. They did another change where now my timeline is back to being a random jumble of things instead of chronological, and I can't figure. I haven't figured out how to change it back yet, and I'm just going to ignore the other elephant in the room when it comes to Twitter. So. But yeah, so Reddit's a good one. Slack. So the Kubernetes Slack, if you are on there, anybody can join. There is an OpenShift users room or channel, I guess they call them, over on Slack where Johnny and I hang out. You're welcome to reach out to us there as well. And we like to tag in. We'll bring in other people, other experts as needed, because there's a lot of folks from Red Hat and from across both OpenShift and OKD who haunt those halls, so to speak. So Andrew.Sullivan@redhat.com, and then Mr. Rickard is Johnny, JONNY, at redhat.com, or at JRockTX1 across all of the various social media platforms. So yeah. So that being said, kind of as we always do, or as we always like to kick off our shows with, we have some top of mind topics. I say we have some. Actually, most of them are all related to today's topic. So I think I only have like one or two things that that I wanted to bring up, unless you've got some things, Johnny.
No.
Okay. Yeah. So really, the big one that I wanted to bring up is there was an internal thread that somebody started around. My customer is overcommitting CPU resources and memory resources inside of their cluster. This is bad. How do I explain to them that this is bad? And the response that they got, both from me as well as from several other folks, is, well, it's not inherently bad to overcommit your resources. So what do we mean when we say overcommit resources? Where's my screen here? Let me show an example. So coming over here to my cluster, if I do like an OC get node and OC scribe node, and we'll go with this guy. Oops. So way down here at the bottom of our describe, we have this resource output, right? CPU and memory. And we can see that roughly half, 52% of both CPU and memory on this node is allocated to requests. Basically, it's put into a reserve status so that nothing else can use those resources. But we don't have any limits. So Kubernetes, and therefore OpenShift, won't let you have more than 100% of the resources tied up in requests. And that's just if a request, remember, is tantamount to a reservation, and you can't reserve more than 100% of the resource. It just doesn't work that way. However, limits can be overcommitted. You can see it says it right here. So I could have limits in place. So maybe my pod requests, right? It says, please reserve for me 500 millicpu, half a CPU, but put a limit of 64 CPUs, right? So that way it can go all the way up to consuming some massive amount. That would show up here as being whatever percent that is. I think this host has like probably 4 CPUs, if I had to guess, judging by this number. So if it had a limit of 64 CPUs, that would be thousands of percent of quote unquote overcommit. That value it does mean something. It doesn't mean something. So it does mean something in that it is an indication of how much workload you have and how much contention there could possibly be. That being said, it's not a terribly helpful metric in that respect because pods don't have to have limits. So you could have, and this host does, I mean, you can see here, there's a whole bunch of pods, 41 pods on here. Not a single one of them has a request, or excuse me, a limit. So therefore it shows up as nothing. I could put 250 or 500 pods on here and not a single one have a limit, and it would still show up as 0. So it's not a great indicator of things like overcommitment or how much contention there could possibly be. So why is that good and bad? So we want to be able to use as much of the resources, much of the CPU and the memory as we can, right? I'm paying for this 100% of those resources, 100% of those 4 CPUs and that 16 gigabytes of RAM, whether or not I use 1% of it or 100% of it. So as an administrator, if I'm artificially limiting myself to say 50% utilization, that means if this, and this is running in AWS, I have no idea what the hourly cost is, but let's say it's $2 an hour. Well, I'm effectively, if I limit it to 50% utilization, I have to pay for 2 of those to reach the capacity, the resources of 1. I hope that makes sense. I'm looking at you in my window here, Johnny, to see if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
So it means that, right, it gets more expensive to add more resources. So I want to be able to utilize as much of those as possible. So overcommitment doesn't necessarily mean anything bad, so long as we don't actually cause contention. A little bit of contention is fine, especially with CPU, right? Because effectively, hey, the pod, it's requesting 2 CPUs, but there's only 1.5 CPUs worth of resources available. So it might get throttled a little bit. It might take a little bit longer to run. This is perfectly normal. This is what happens in literally every, not just Linux system, every operating system when it gets busy. The processes that are running compete for time. In Linux, in RHEL and CoreOS, it's the CFS, the Completely Fair Scheduler, I think is what it stands for. It basically allocates that time to those processes. So it's normal, it's expected, it's okay. Where it's bad is when it starts being detrimental to the application. And that's where we want to be careful and utilize other features of the platform in order to, well, make it be as good as possible, right? Sorry for my poor English there. So things like the descheduler. So if we look at, let's come over here to docs.openshift.com. If I look at the descheduler here, and we talked about this during one of the streams, Johnny, that I'm not remembering which one because it's been a while ago.
Yeah, I'll find it.
But so the descheduler here has this lifecycle and utilization policy where effectively if it sees that a pod has or a node has low node utilization or high node utilization, it will begin to take action to balance those out. But CPU is considered a compressible resource. So there is no equivalent of like the out of memory killer for CPU. So we have to have something like eviction or ideally pod health checks. Where are we at here? No, you're not going to show up. Pod health check, maybe? Oh, there we go. Monitoring application health. So with a liveness health check configured on our pods, that health check can do things like, hey, is my application responding? Is the latency adequate? Is it getting enough resources? Is it doing all of the things that it needs to do to determine that the application is healthy? And if not, maybe it's being throttled and therefore application latency went from 5 milliseconds to 5 seconds. It basically can declare it as unhealthy and then result in it being restarted and potentially terminated, which means that it would go through a rescheduling process and land on a lower utilized node, assuming a lower utilized node is available. So long story short here, overcommitment is good for CPU. We want to be able to utilize all of those resources to the maximum potential that you feel safe with. Again, you can configure various features and things in order to kind of balance it out how you see fit. Be aware of driving the overall cluster utilization, very high, where you can't accommodate things like nodes failure. Pod disruption budgets, pod priorities, all of those things play a role in what happens when a node fails and you're running at a capacity threshold where it can't just outright restart all of those pods. So it's you've heard me say it before, Johnny, right? It's a delicate dance that requires input and attention from both the app teams as well as the administrator team.
Yeah, definitely, 100%.
Yeah, so I've been ignoring chat. Let me look at chat here for a second because I see Lucian will answer your question here in just a moment as soon as I finish this thought. Yeah, I see you already addressed that, Johnny. Thank you.
Yep.
What was that command again? So the command to look at these, I just did an OC describe on the node. So I did OC get node to look at all of my nodes, and then OC describe node, and then the node name, and it shows me that. Shows up inside of here, and it's also reported up through the metrics and all that other stuff. So if you're looking in the console, you can come over here to compute and nodes, and I'm just going to pick one of these at random, and like you can see the stuff here. So you can see as I scroll out here, it says 7.34 gigabytes requested, and then the amount used. It does not show limits on this chart, though. I don't know if it shows it on the one that it links to. Doesn't look like it. So yeah, that is, you can look at it graphically as well through Prometheus. Yeah, Jamie, that's a good point. Be careful of going back to the sane defaults and being able to choose or decide what's good and bad for you. Alert fatigue is real and it's a real concern, so just be careful of that. I will say, very much to your point, Jamie, of there is risk associated with it, right? The reason why those emails are generated, the reason why the default alert configs are set at whatever value they're set at that I don't remember off the top of my head, is because it adds risk. And the same is true of virtualization environments, right? When I'm using VMware or Rev or whatever I happen to be using, when I'm overcommitting those resources on that host, with virtual machines, it's going to start to generate errors, especially as the virtual machines, utilize more and more of those resources. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but we want to adjust those for our threshold. So I said a moment ago, it's about risk. Well, the risk is what happens if my overcommitment results in contention, which results in poor application performance. So I have to balance that risk of how much overcommitment and therefore potentially unused resources in quote unquote normal times versus how much contention during or how much impact there is during contentious times. My customers like to over request, to be sure. Yeah. That's let's see, how long have I been an administrator? Since 2000, and the first VM I deployed was 2007. So it has been a problem for at least that long.
Yeah. Since the beginning of virtual machines.
Yeah, so Marcel, I don't have a solution for that. You can approach it two ways, I think. One is approach it as a technology problem. So utilize things like the vertical pod autoscaler in order to have it make an assessment of how much requests should be associated with a given pod. That can help to right size as much as it can, right size that. And there's other tools that do similar types of things, as well as partners that do those types of things. Turbonomic is one that I was recently talking with. The other side is the human side. So, and this was how, Johnny, when you and I were coworkers as administrators a decade ago, this was how we handled it, right? We had a reporting system that would go in and we'd get a report that showed that, this virtual machine has, 10 gigabytes of RAM and they have a reservation for 6 of those gigabytes, but they're only using like 768, right? They're only using 3/4 of a gigabyte, and they peaked at 2 gigabytes. And so we basically go and shame them and say, hey, you've requested, you've reserved all of these resources. They're not available to anyone else. And please give us these back. Like you obviously don't need them. I guess another option would be pay as you go, right? That's how the hyperscalers handle it. You paid for it, it's yours, but you paid for it. Whereas I think most organizations, certainly every organization I've worked for as an admin, we never did chargeback.
It's free.
Yeah, and which led to a lot of those.
Yeah, I mean, even like when I left before I came to Red Hat, right? Like we were always talking about doing chargeback, but just never. Like there's always we should implement this because it'll help IT get money back from some of these bigger organizations, but they just never implement it. Yeah, it's a great idea, hard to put in practice.
Yeah, because there's also the budget stuff, right? And but IT is allocated the money for IT, not finance. Finance has money to do finance things, not IT things. So it's a very complicated problem. Yeah, so let's jump back up. Let's talk about Lucian's, and apologies for butchering anybody's name. Comment. So why OpenShift and not any other Kubernetes out there? So this is a question that we get. I wouldn't say often, but we do get it on a regular basis. And my response has always been the same, in that OpenShift is Kubernetes. So anything you do with any other Kubernetes, you can do with OpenShift. The differentiator with OpenShift is that it is an opinionated Kubernetes. So what that means is that Red Hat, out of the box, we take Kubernetes, we take an SDN, we take CSI drivers, we take all of these things that you need to have a production Kubernetes deployment, and we provide that. We box it all up, we integrate everything, we test everything, we verify everything is going to work together, and then we support all of that. And I think Docker used to use this phrase, it's batteries included but replaceable. So you don't like OpenShift SDN or OV and Kubernetes that we use, that's fine. Go, Tigera and Calico works with OpenShift. You can deploy that and you can use that. There's nothing wrong with that. You want to use a third-party CSI driver, NetApp, Dell EMC, one of the ones that's not included out of the box, that's great. You can absolutely use those. And you don't break support in doing that. So it's very much the same model that we have with RHEL, just applied to Kubernetes.
Yeah, and specifically around the question about being like Tanzu versus OpenShift, right? I think it comes down to like what your organization's preferences for vendors are. If you've already bought completely into Red Hat OpenShift, then it probably makes sense to stick with OpenShift versus Tanzu. And I don't know, I don't have enough information on Tanzu to be able to say like here's a future for future parity example, like, hey, you get this with OpenShift and you don't get this with Tanzu or whatever. But I think it comes down to organizational taste, appetite for vendors. If you're all in on VMware, probably makes sense. If you're all in on Red Hat, probably makes sense to stick with OpenShift.
Yeah, I won't say that I'm not biased.
Yeah, I was trying to play the neutral, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I'm wearing a Red Hat shirt. There's a little Red Hat OpenShift logo in the corner of the stream here. I'm a little biased, and that's okay. But yeah, I would always encourage anyone and everyone, if you're curious, go check out learn.openshift.com. Let me reshare my screen. I'll show you. So if we go to learn.openshift.com, so the landing page here, if we scroll down, we get down here to these interactive lessons. And I can choose, for example, OpenShift, and hit and apply on the filter. And I have all of these different things that I can do. And I can literally, and I'm going to walk through this, right? I click the start button. Notice I haven't logged in. I'm not logged into anything. I hit launch. And aside from it, apparently the pool is exhausted, so it'll take about 8 minutes. But when it's done, I'm going to be dropped right into an OpenShift cluster. So if you want to experiment with it, you want to test it, you want to check it out, you can use these. They'll walk you through different aspects. you can get hands-on literally within, if the pool isn't exhausted, like 15 seconds. Otherwise, it's 8 minutes and 15 seconds. So I always encourage everyone, right? Don't listen to me. Don't listen to Johnny. Like, go and experience it for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to be at Summit, which I think Summit call for papers closed finally, but I do know that they're talking about having like, I want to say 30 or 36 different hands-on labs at Summit this year. So if you have the opportunity to come to Summit, you're going to have a chance to get hands-on as well, and be in a proctored environment and go through and see all the stuff that we got going on there. I haven't seen the list yet. I know they were asking for lab suggestions as well. So
yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I heard that this year's summit's gonna be like super technical. Like it's just gonna be like it's gonna be insane.
Yeah, I hope, I think that they finally listened to all of us who were complaining about it not being technical enough, not being enough of a
Mhm.
user conference like it was 5 years ago. I think COVID and being virtual and all that kind of threw all of that through a loop and made it hard.
Mhm.
But yeah, I'm looking forward to Summit this year. I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, it's gonna be
Nice.
exciting. Yeah, the CFP, the call for papers was like what last Friday, right? I think so.
I honestly don't remember. I saw a whole
Okay,
bunch of emails about it, and
should
I
be
think it was
good.
the 11th, if I'm being honest. I think it was last Wednesday was the last day.
Oh yeah, yeah, you're right. You're right. It is. It was.
Dwayne, could this be automated with Ansible? Yes. Yes, of course. So OpenShift is Kubernetes. So the Ansible Kubernetes modules you can use to automate, to do all of the things inside of there, as well as Ansible itself. Ansible automation platform can be deployed onto OpenShift, so you can host it as well as use it to manage the platform. And then there's endless debates about what's the best way to do that, to automate OpenShift and Kubernetes based applications, right?
Hmm.
They use things like builds or Helm charts or pipelines or GitOps, or gosh, Christian's screaming at his monitor right now.
Say it.
Or Ansible or Terraform, or like the options are endless. It's like Johnny said before. What are you comfortable with? What makes the most sense for your processes and organization?
Hmm.
Okay, I just realized, I just looked at the clock and it's half past, and we have just a ton of stuff to go through today. So the way that we usually do these streams, sorry, and Johnny, before I ramble on here, is there anything you wanted to add or anything you had to say?
No, yeah, you covered it, man.
Okay.
Like I think we're
Okay.
doing good.
Yeah, I know it's like riding a bike, right?
Yeah.
It's funny. I was setting up for the stream and I was updating our graphic that we used with the our faces and the title and all that. And the last date was like December 14th. I'm like, gosh, has it really been that long since we had an Ask an OpenShift admin?
Yeah, man.
Wow,
Yeah, it's been a long month.
it has. And yeah, lots of stuff going on. So the way that these usually work is the product management team will have a live stream that is, lately they've been about 90 minutes in length, where they go through kind of all of the different new features, new functions in the release, across the whole gamut, the breadth of OpenShift. So what Johnny and I do is, after they do that presentation, which is live streamed, so if we go to youtube.com/OpenShift, so you can go to this live and go here, and there is a what's new in OpenShift 4.12. So that is the live stream that they did last week. You can also go to red.ht/next and new, no spaces. That'll take you to the landing page here for what's new in OpenShift 4.12, as well as a link to the slides here. So that is, and we'll paste that link into the chat here. So both of those ways you can see that recording, you can get access to the slides and all of that. But what Johnny and I do is, after that, we'll go in and we'll identify the things that we thought were interesting or maybe need some more details or things that are just, we want to make sure we call out to, our audience, to you all, to administrators. So that's where I want to start today. So I'm looking at this massive list of things here. I'm hoping that we can get through most of these in varying levels of detail in the next about 45 minutes. Of course, please feel free to ask questions as we go through or anything like that, because effectively Johnny and I are taking notes for future episodes as well. So we've got a list of 6. I think I see 6 here. 6 things that we're going to effectively deep dive on. So the disconnected agent-based installer, eBPF-based network observability, CoreOS layering, right? All of these things that we want to deep dive into and we'll dedicate a whole stream to. But we're cramming a whole bunch of things that maybe don't need that based off of our judgment. But that doesn't mean that they might not be interesting to you all and you don't want some more information on them. So absolutely, if you have questions, if you want more details, we'll tackle all of that. Let's see, just looking. Yeah, logging 5.6. We're working on that one, our Hope 9. We've been working with those folks for probably 3 months now, Johnny. Trying to get them to come on, and I think holidays and release schedules and other stuff have gotten in our way, but we're close. We're so close.
We actually are very, very close. So
yeah. All right. So let's see. First one on my list here. I sat here, and for anybody who watched the live stream, I was in chat. I was listening to it the whole time and all of this. I honestly missed when they presented this during the live stream. I knew it was going to be announced, but I missed it during the live stream. And that is that EUS releases, so the even numbered releases, 4.12 being one of those, now have support for 24 months. So previously, all releases, even or odd, EUS or not, were supported for 18 months. Starting with 4.12, those even numbered releases are supported for 24 months, and you still have the accelerated EUS to EUS update path. So to me, this is a big one. It means particularly for EUS releases, EUS to EUS, we now have that much more overlap between supported releases so that, you can take your time in testing and validating and all those. You don't have, I think before it was like 3 months. It came out to be a relatively short time period of overlapping support, and PM, the product folks listened and they heard that it wasn't enough time, and so they extended it, and I think that's amazing.
Yeah, I agree.
So hello Lost, thank you for joining us, Lost FF. Let's see, now that Vector is GA, will FIPS clusters be eligible? That's a good question. I don't know. Let's take a note on that one, Johnny. We can ask the logging folks, because I just saw an email come in from them like as we were hitting the go live button, trying to schedule that. Lost, what do I need to do to work in Red Hat? Apply. All of our jobs, all of our stuff is available on the Red Hat jobs portal. So if you happen to know anybody at Red Hat, you can also ask them, or if they, and like it has to be somebody that but like ask them if they'll do a referral for you. That's always a great way. Again, the recruiter team, I saw an email earlier today where it was something like, the best way to find new Red Hatters is for existing Red Hatters to refer them. So yeah, definitely reach out if you know anybody. Identify the positions that you're interested in. Johnny, thank you for linking the jobs portal there, and then just submit against it. So it is, again, I'm biased. Red Hat's a great place to work. So depending on the role, depending on the position, it can be competitive.
Oh yeah. But yeah, and just know it can take time too, right? Like if you apply for a job, it can take some time, especially coming back after the holidays, end of the quarter, beginning of the quarter, that type of stuff. So don't lose faith if you don't get a response in a day. Just give it a little bit of time. You'll be all right.
Yeah, definitely. Let's see, rolling through the list here. Default SDN. So this one is something that's been rumored to happen for a good long while. So OpenShift, since version 4.6, has supported 2 different SDNs. So OpenShift SDN has been the one that's been there for ages. So OpenShift SDN is VXLAN. Is that right, Johnny? I think it's VXLAN based. Rock solid, scalable, right? Can do many of the things and all of that. But one of the driving reasons for adding and eventually moving the default over to OV and Kubernetes as of 4.12 is effectively community. OpenShift SDN, as the name implies, has a community of basically one, Red Hat, right? We created, we maintain, we contribute, right? It's open source, of course, but other Kuberneteses are not using OpenShift SDN as their SDN. OV and Kubernetes, on the other hand, is used by other Kubernetes distributions. So we gain more community. We gain the ability to participate, as well as add features. Let me find my documentation link here. So OV and Kubernetes. So if we come down here, we have the supported network plugin feature matrix. So you can see there's a number of features that are possible and supported with OV and Kubernetes that are not with OpenShift SDN. So for context, or a little bit of context, some deployments, single node OpenShift, Rosa, anytime you needed to do Windows nodes, which required hybrid networking, you already had to use OV and Kubernetes for those. If you wanted to do like the IPsec encryption stuff, I think that was in 4.8 or 4.9 when they added that, where traffic traversing between nodes across the SDN is encrypted using IPsec, like that relies on OV and Kubernetes. So effectively, this change is they did testing, validation, scale testing, performance testing, all of those things, where now they feel comfortable that OV and Kubernetes can satisfy and can meet the demands of the biggest set of our customers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Historically, my response, when people would say, "Oh, why wouldn't I use OV and Kubernetes now?" Absolutely, go ahead and use it, but it's not as thoroughly tested, particularly at the scale side of things. So unless you have reason, like, hey, I want to do IPv6, I need to do IPsec encryption, maybe stick with the default for now. But that's changed now. Oh, that's good.
It's to you and our Hope 9's point, right? It's a long time coming, right? I think early on there were some features, like it might have been the IPsec thing that weren't supported, but yeah, it's all good. That's awesome.
Yep. And what else was I going to? Oh, upgrades. So one, OpenShift 4.12 is available today. You can upgrade. I haven't double checked this, but historically, you can upgrade in the fast channel as soon as it's GA. It is a fully supported update. If you're in the fast channel, it's only candidate updates that are not supported. But I understand most folks want to wait for stable. But if you upgrade, it will not automatically migrate your network. You will stay on OpenShift SDN until you choose to migrate. That migration is, you can migrate the network, but it is, I'll say, minimally disruptive. Basically, it has to reboot the nodes in order to do it. They are working on, and I don't remember the precise release, but they are working on doing a quote unquote live migration, which feels weird saying because I always use that in context of like Rev or OpenShift virtualization. But a live migration from OpenShift SDN to OV and Kubernetes that is non-disruptive. So OV and Kubernetes default for all new installs. It is not automatically changed when you upgrade to 4.12. And the upgrade is a manual process. So let's see, IPsec via Submariner, Windows VMs. Yep, yeah, our Hope 9. Thank you. So you have to reboot the nodes today because it from what I understand, it wants to change one of the settings. Basically, it has to disconnect all of the pods and then reconnect all of the pods. And they either don't have the testing or don't have the capability today of doing that without basically stopping everything. And the easiest way to stop everything is to reboot. So I don't know. Again, I don't know if it's testing or if it's adding a new feature, but it'll get there. Yep, good point. rhope9, your MTU will drop down by 50 bytes. Continuing on our journey here, Red Hat Device Edge is developer preview. Is Device Edge in the docs? You see what I did there? Said I typed device, meaning to type device edge, but I was saying docs, so I typed docs.
Oh, trust me, it happens all the time.
Let's see. Red Hat Device Edge. I should have all of these links beforehand, but what's forethought? What's planning?
Right. Well, and that takes all the fun out of fat fingering it, so.
Yeah. So Device Edge is the productized name for what we used to call MiniShift in combination with RHEL for Edge. And you can see it describes that here in the first paragraph. So what does this mean? So RHEL for Edge is Red Hat Enterprise Linux that uses RPM OS tree for basically OS management. So very much similar to CoreOS. You can create RHEL for Edge instances using the RHEL image builder. You can push those out. You can push out updates. Ansible and Ansible Automation Platform are usually the management platforms for RHEL and RHEL for Edge, as well as Satellite. I should be sure to mention that so the Satellite people don't get upset with me. And then MiniShift is, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this. It is Kubernetes with the OpenShift API. So, we've had MiniShift. We've talked about this a couple of times on the stream, right? We had the engineering folks on here first. We had Henri and Diego come on and show us it being used. I think we've got a couple other things longer term. Thank you, Microshift, for correcting me in chat, Johnny. I keep saying MiniShift. MiniShift was the thing to stand up a single nodes. Yeah, Dave correcting me. Words are hard today, folks. I'm sorry. So, yeah, Microshift is Kubernetes, the Red Hat, the Kubernetes underneath OpenShift, along with the OpenShift API. So that's really useful for a number of different things, right? Hey, I've got this, ultra small edge device, an ARM device that's running, 1 or 2 cores, and I think it's 2 cores and 2 gigabytes of memory is the minimum. Ultra small, designed to only host a small amount of things, and I want to use the Kubernetes API to deploy my applications out there. It is not a full quote unquote OpenShift. So, for example, there is no full CVO, cluster version operator, and all of the services and things that cluster version operator deploys. So to get an idea of that, OC get CO, all of these things, most of them aren't going to show up in a Microshift deployment, in a Red Hat Device Edge deployment. OLM, Operator Lifecycle Manager, isn't there. So there's no operator catalog, all of that type of stuff. It's designed to be able to deploy containerized applications out to the edge using the Kubernetes API. And it's another option. One of the things that we showed at Summit, I think it was last year, the Ansible folks actually had a use case where they used OpenShift and pipelines to build a container image, and then they used Ansible to pull that container image out to a device running at the edge and run it using Podman. So kind of similar type of use case. They were just using Ansible and Podman instead of ACM, and which ACM, I think Microshift Device Edge is on their roadmap. ACM or another Kubernetes tool for deploying those out. Don't get hybrid networking with Windows, the upgrade. Yeah, that's a good point, Nate. Hybrid networking is still an install time option. So if you want to have Windows nodes in your cluster, you have to make that choice upfront when you deploy. Telling you, my English is suffering today.
PTO brain.
I haven't been on PTO in over 2 weeks now, so that's not even an excuse anymore.
Oh man, I tried.
I have no excuse, no excuse. Hosted control planes. We've talked about. Did we show this? Like show this here
Yeah,
on this?
we had a Dell on. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Can I show what this looks like? I think I can. If I could type. Uh, so what I've done here is I connected to a different cluster that I've got running. If you've got good eyes, you can see RHTE here. This is one of the clusters that we'll be using for Tech Exchange to show off some things. And what this cluster has is it has hosted control planes, aka Hypershift, deployed inside of it. So what this means is that I can go through and I can create a hosted cluster. So let's do an OC get hosted cluster -A. So I have this cluster roads that is deployed inside of here, and it is a hosted control plane cluster. So what we looked at up here when I did this OC get pod command, these are all the pods that make up the control plane for this cluster. So they're the control plane for cluster roads is hosted in the Americas cluster. And then the nodes for cluster roads, the worker nodes, are managed from this cluster as well. So I can do OC get machine. I think it takes over the default CRD name. You can see that I have 4 nodes that have been deployed from that, and those are managed via node pool. I have 2 node pools. So this uses Cluster API. In order to deploy those nodes, they get joined back to the cluster. If I do OC get route-a, no, I don't want to do that because that won't show it. Anyways, basically it creates an endpoint that is the API, that is the control plane for our cluster. So super cool stuff. It officially enters tech preview with OpenShift 4.12. You don't need, so you just need OpenShift to do this, along with the MultiCluster Engine. So just to show that, if I come here to operators and go to Operator Hub and search for multi-LTI cluster, we have this MultiCluster Engine for Kubernetes. So this is what you need to install, and from here you can then go in and begin deploying hosted control planes. Just remember that they're tech preview, or excuse me, tech preview, not dev preview. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of resources. We had Adele on, we talked about it. There's a bunch of resources on cloud.redhat.com. I'll do my best to summarize these and we can share them out. Ben Schmaus has done several blogs on like how to use this with internal or with local resources. So, you're running a bare metal cluster and you want to host control planes for other virtual and bare metal clusters inside of there. Excuse me. So how to do that, how to make all of that happen. Really cool stuff. I think this has a lot of potential for increasing density of clusters that are deployed and optimizing resources. I also think it's really cool for things like you can host the control plane in your central data center and have the worker nodes out at the edge where, again, resources might be constrained. So it's like almost an extreme version of remote worker nodes.
I think you and I have been talking about this since April or May last year, like when it was starting to get hot, starting to get some traction. Like this is an exciting feature. Like I'm really glad that it's going mainstream.
Yeah. We're going to be talking about it at Summit. I know I've seen some of the session proposals. I know it's something that we want to talk about there. For any Red Hatters who are watching, I think we have several sessions about it at Tech Exchange coming up been 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So keep an eye on that there. I've been experimenting with it, breaking it, and finding different things about it as I've gone through. I've learned quite a bit, and it's really interesting the way that it works. So for example, when you want to like manage your cluster, I'm looking at the wrong thing here. So like when I want to configure authentication for this cluster, I configure authentication on this hosted cluster resource. So just like I would go in today and I would say, create this OAuth, edit the OAuth object to add, whatever my authentication scheme happens to be. With hosted control planes, I basically add in the YAML that stanza into the hosted cluster object, and it pushes out that configuration. So as administrators, it means that we can like scale really easily all of a sudden. Before, not that it was hard to do something like that before, but it was easier to use something like ACM. And I use ACM and I create a policy that says configure this OAuth object inside of all of my clusters. Well, now it's just one stanza in each one of those. So I thought that was really cool.
That is nice.
Among many other things that are inside of
Mm-hmm.
there. Let's see, moving down the list. Console. So I just discovered this morning. I saw it in the slide deck that they used, and I was like, oh, dynamic plugins. That's finally going GA. Hey, that's really cool. Jafar, who's one of the folks I work with on Solution Patterns, he created a dynamic plugin to show like the patterns like directly in the interface and be able to click on them and use them. Johnny, your team has talked about doing something similar with validated patterns.
Yep.
So they're now so dynamic plugins are now GA. So to me, and let me find the docs again. Dynamic plugins. If I take the first result here, which is the example, basically I can go in and through YAML, I can define an add-in to the menu, or even to things like in these pages, like I can add tabs over here for other things. So to me, this is useful in a couple of different ways. As administrators, if I'm, an administrator or the administrator team for my OpenShifts, and I'm enabling others to access those, I can provide access to resources that are important to them. Hey, here's our internal wiki with documentation, and it shows up as like a menu navigation item over here instead of up here where they would previously be. Hey, if I'm maybe, and we used to, when I was a VMware administrator, right? The NetApp plugin into vCenter was great because I could go in and I could access all of my storage resources just from vCenter. Well, I don't know that any storage vendors have done this yet, but in theory, our partners could go in and they could add in, say under storage, you could have a storage vendor button here that goes in and you can see, maybe what your cloud native storage. So think, and who is it? Why is the name escaping me, Johnny? ODF. ODF already has this. If you deploy ODF, they have a button here where you can go in and you can see the status of the ODF cluster. Other partners can now do that type of stuff. Or at a minimum, you can, the administrator, if you're also the storage admin, you can go in and add a thing here where when you click on it, it pops up your storage admin interface or something like that. So I don't know. I was strangely excited to see something so simple. I say so simple, knowing full well that in the background there's a lot of complexity there.
Yeah, I think like especially with as much focus as we're putting on the console, like you want people to be able to have like that one pane of glass for all the things, right? So I think it's a cool feature that they have. The way that we do it right now is if you look at like the 9 square drop down, we'll add like a button up there so that way you click on that, and then if you have the plugin set up, it'll take you to like an external cluster or whatever. So it's pretty nice to be able to jump around from one place.
Yeah, it's a convenience thing, at least in the short term. Long term, I think it definitely adds a lot of potential functionality. Again, I'm hoping, I'm expecting great things from our partners. I haven't told any of them that yet, but
You've been warned.
So the other thing that happened in the console is they added the ability to customize the things that you see. So, for example, and I haven't tried this yet, so we're going to try this live. You'll see up here, I've got this show getting started resources. So this stuff up here, we also have, I can switch over. I've got the developer perspective. If I come up here to the developer perspective, there should be various, well, I thought there was. I haven't looked at the developer perspective in a while because, not a developer. But, we have all of these various things that we can use. But maybe I don't care about those. So if I come down here to administration and go to cluster settings and configuration, and the console team being the console team, and they own the console, therefore they can do things that no one else can. If I select, so I went to cluster settings, configuration, and if I look for the console operator.openshift.io instance, so I can select this guy, come up here and go to customize. Literally, this is the only one that has this, by the way. So I can go to customize, and I can change a bunch of different aspects of my console. For example, I can turn off the developer perspective.
Oh, that's cool.
Saved, and now if I refresh this, well, I say that. I don't know how long it actually tries or it takes to apply. There we go. I had to do a force refresh or a full refresh. I no longer have a developer perspective. Like, that's really cool.
That's cool.
So, and there was an email chain about this internally. Like 2 weeks ago, somebody was asking, "Hey, my customer, they don't want to have the developer perspective. They want to turn it off." And the response was, "Just wait, it'll be there." I don't know, and I'm not going to try because it could break our cluster that we're using here. I wonder what would happen if I set both of these to disabled. Like, I feel like that could. I don't know what that'll do, but anyways, you can also see down here at the quick starts. So remember, if I come here, we've got these getting started. So if I go back to my configuration here and go back to console and customize, I think what will happen here is if I select all of these guys and move them over, and it's saved again, and I'll go ahead and do a shift refresh just to be sure. I think that'll disable these things. I'm not positive. Yeah, see, at least one of them disappeared. So the quick start stuff, which I do find helpful. I don't know that I would want to disable it, but all of that stuff can be controlled now too. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, that's cool. I like how simple it is. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the little things. I love the slide that they had in the presentation too. It was like console user happiness or something like that. And I think it was Ali who was presenting. He had like 24 RFEs that they had added in and stuff like that. So yeah, console, always new exciting things happening in here. If you didn't see or if you aren't aware, in 4.11, they did remove the Grafana interface. So you might want to go back and look at that stream if you weren't aware of that. That's the other big thing that I try and bring up regularly. Like, there is no longer a Grafana interface for looking at the metrics. There is just the dashboards here in OpenShift console itself. So definitely go back and check that out, including we did a stream with deploying a custom Grafana dashboard as well. Yep. We'll have to dig that one up.
I've got it right here.
Let's see, what time is it? Okay. We've got 1, 2, 3. We're like halfway through the list here, and 15 minutes to go, Johnny. We might run a little long. Let's see, platform. So vSphere. So a couple of interesting things to be aware of here. So with vSphere, the biggest change is that with OpenShift 4.12, you have to be using vSphere 7.x or newer. vSphere 6 is no longer supported. So if we come over here to installing and I scroll down to vSphere, and I don't know if it's in the preparing. Here we go. Right. So you must use virtual hardware version 15 or later. You must use vSphere 7.0.2 or later. Version 6 is no longer supported. Be aware that OpenShift 4.13 will require vSphere 7U2. So I don't remember what version that is, what 7. Whatever that is, but 7.0 U2 is required. And this has to do with CSI. So effectively, CSI is and has been the default. So as we are removing the entry stuff, this is our intermediary version where you can no longer deploy new entry provisioned PVCs. You can only do CSI PVCs, which requires, again, that's 702 or later and hardware version 15 or later. 4.13 will require 7.0 U2 because of CSI migration. So at that point, we will do a migration for any entry volumes to CSI volumes. And that's why we require that 7.0 U2. So keep that in mind. If you're not on 7.0 U2, effectively, it will mark your cluster as unable to upgrade until you get to vSphere 7.0 U2. So that's kind of the big one that I wanted to call out. You may have seen in the presentation. I should bring up the slides. Are you the slides? No, you're not the slides. Here we go. Let's go to the slides. Really? You're not going to let me? Really? Who added this? Open link in new tab. Let's see. So if we come out here to, where are you? I might have missed it. I might have gone too far in my rapid clicking. Nope, you're not going to show up, are you? Okay. I don't know. There's a slide somewhere that talks about it. So it is tech preview for zone awareness inside on vSphere. So what does this mean? I've got a slide on this somewhere, Johnny. Let me find it.
It's slide 39. So it's like, if you look at, it's under installer flexibility is the section.
Okay. Slide 39, you say?
Yeah. That's in the actual, looking at, or 36 in, no, I'm sorry, 39 in the internal deck.
Yeah, they appear to not be. It's so funny to me seeing how the sausage is made with the what's new, because literally until we hit the go live button and somebody, whoever's running the slides, pushes the display button, they're making changes to those slides. And then as soon as it's done, they go back in and they make a whole bunch more changes. So it would not surprise me if they have added or changed those slides. So I might need to re-upload these into Speaker Deck with the new version. Anyways, so zone awareness in vSphere. Tech preview, so not supported yet. Slide 34. Let's see. Did I just miss it? Was I not? Yeah, it's OpenShift virtualization though. RHOPE 9. So zone awareness takes, think of the AWS region and availability zone concept. So AWS has regions: US East 1, US East 2, US West 1, US West 2. And then inside of there, they have availability zones: US East 1A, 1B, 1C. So what this does is it effectively maps those concepts to vSphere data centers and DRS clusters. So I add a tag in vCenter to my data center that says data center 1 is, region X. Data center 2 is region Y. Data center 3 is region Z. And then DRS cluster A in region 1 is zone X1, so on and so forth. So very much like AWS, I have this region zone type of layout. And then in vSphere, and put it in here. Oh, maybe it's in the release notes. Let's see here. So with vSphere, yep, here we go. Multi-zone installer provisioned infrastructure. What it does is it uses those tags to distribute your nodes across those zones and those regions for high availability regions or reasons. So you can see here, CSI topology takes advantage of the same thing. So this will walk you through how to set up all of those things, how to set up the tags inside of vCenter, put them onto those various resources, including the data stores, and then you can use that to distribute availability across. As well as with CSI, it's also for, you wouldn't want to have, for example, a new PVC created in, data center 1 cluster A when the node is in data center 3 cluster M, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because most likely, well, theoretically, they're in different rooms, different buildings, literally different regions, maybe inside of your organization. So that would be bad. So CSI also uses that. So this is a really cool one. Again, remember it's technology preview, so not supported, but please do test it out if it's something that's interesting to you, and let us know of any errors, issues, or problems that you have. The last thing that I wanted to say with regard to vSphere is there was a very nuanced change, and thanks to Chuck Douglas internally for pointing this out. If I go here to, we'll go with installing on network, installing a cluster on vSphere with network customizations. So this is an IPI install. I'd search for ingress VIP. So remember with IPI, in the install config, we provide 2 IP addresses, the API virtual IP address and the ingress virtual IP address. So you'll notice here that this is changed. It's now plural, API VIPs, ingress VIPs. And there's a handy little note out here to the side that says that as of 4.12 and later, API VIP, the singular instance, ingress VIP, API VIP, is now deprecated. And instead we use a list in the value of API VIPs. So why did this happen? Because of dual stack support. So now you can provide a list in YAML of an IPv4 address and an IPv6 address for those. So you can't have multiple IPv4, ingress IPs or API IPs, but you can have an IPv4 and an IPv6. So small change. I have not tested what happens if you say you use an old ingress or a install config.yaml that is not pluralized and you try and deploy a 4.12 cluster. I don't know if it would fail early on, like as soon as you try and deploy, or if it would get way down in the process and suddenly say, I don't have an ingress IP and just fail. I don't know.
I would think it'd be early on. I would think that they'd have some kind of validation that goes out and says, it's not meeting the criteria for the, how, like if you have, if you don't have your worker type or whatever configured correctly, it's like, no, I can't do this because I don't know how to schedule it or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know. Because I would hope that it happens early.
Mm-hmm.
It would be nice if it happened like this is a VIPs, or the pluralized one is like a required field. So just like if you don't have a password, for vCenter in there, it'll fail. Or maybe so therefore, if it's not pluralized, it shows up as missing, and therefore the installer would immediately barf and say, "Oh, I can't continue. You're missing this required field."
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe at worst, it would do some sort of translation of, "Oh, I see you provided this. I'm going to go ahead and translate this for you to, the IPv4 list. But here, let me tell you that this is deprecated and you need to fix your install config, instead of going all the way through and deploying Bootstrap and deploying control plane nodes, and then all of a sudden, like, it just fails to finish bootstrapping because it can't find the, and then you got to go and dig through a bunch of logs and see a bunch of errors, and it's because it never configured it. I hope it's easier
Yeah.
than that.
I'd be so mad.
Like I said, I was gonna test it. I ran out of time yesterday, and because I had to, my home lab has been decommissioned at this point. I'm in a different room, right? We're having work done on the house. I had to turn everything off. I had to like disconnect a bunch of stuff, and so my home lab is out of commission. So the internal resources that I normally used are currently being used for like testing and QA and QE, and they're way over committed right now. And I didn't want to like steal resources from engineering doing engineering things. That just didn't seem right. Let's see what else is in here. Oh, additional composable OpenShift options. So we also had help me out here, Johnny. Who did we have on to talk about composable OpenShift? Was that also Adele?
I don't think it was Adele. It was I don't remember. My Google is about to find out for us though.
So composable OpenShift is, and we did a whole stream on this because to me this is really cool. It gives us the option of not deploying or not adding certain features to OpenShift. So we do this during install time. We can specify, hey, don't include these things. Install. So historically, it was things like the I'm looking at the list of things that have been of new options, but I'm forgetting what the original ones were. And pre, thank you. So I'm going to dig through, and we're going to install config with no hyphen. I'm going to dig through OpenShift and install explain here, and so we can look at it. Let's see, install config dot. It's not platform. Where was it, Johnny?
Don't get me lying.
Capabilities. Yeah, so we have this. So in my install config file, so install config.yaml, there's a capabilities stanza. And through this, we can basically tell it to disable specific components. So, for example, if I look here, I don't know, it doesn't tell us anymore. So, sorry for stumbling for words here. It used to tell us like what are the full set of available options. Anyways, the new ones are the console. So a minute ago, I showed like, hey, I can come in here and I can turn off, say, the developer perspective. I can completely not deploy the console, like just have it not there at all, which is something that a surprising number of people ask for. Actually, it makes sense. App teams, dev teams, they don't ever look at the GUI. They do everything through YAML. We as administrators, as we start to gain more clusters, I feel like there's a leap over to automation tools like ACM and other other GUI based interfaces where we tend to not use the actual console as much. So let's free up some resources. Insights, you can opt not to deploy the insights operator. So insights is useful. I think we should probably bring John Spinks back on to talk about all the new stuff that's happened in insights. But if you're disconnected, insights isn't going to do you any good, right? It has to reach up and talk to the cloud service to get information. So just don't deploy it at all. If you're not using any of the OpenShift storage providers. So what do I mean by that? If we come here, so in the documentation, if I come down to storage and go to storage overview, OpenShift ships with all of these different storage. No, that's not the page I was looking for. Are you the page I'm looking for? Here we go. OpenShift ships with all of these different volume plugins. If you're not going to use any of these, then maybe you don't want to install that. Now, that being said, that could be, so for example, if you're using the LVM operator, I'll get to that one in just a moment. LVM, I don't think uses any of these. You do need to be a little bit careful here. Speaking from experience, like most third-party storage partners, so NetApp, Dell EMC, etc., they'll take advantage of the native NFS and iSCSI functionality or fiber channel functionality. So I don't know if that would affect that stuff, but basically you can choose not to deploy all the storage plugins. You can choose not to deploy the CSI snapshot stuff if you're not going to use CSI snapshots. Again, reducing resource consumption, reducing complexity. Thank you for digging up that link, Johnny. Composable OpenShift.
Yep. I was trying to find the GitHub page, but I can't seem to. I don't know what I've done with it. So
Yeah. Let's see. What was? All right. So I'll pause there. I feel like I've been talking nonstop. I'm gonna pause and make sure haven't missed anything in chat. I think you've been on top of it. So
yeah, we don't really have any. There's no questions. Lost FF had some questions about like why your UI is insecure, and I was just letting them know it's because you're using self-signed search. You're just using like the default installed certificates.
Yeah. Yeah. I see one here. Why isn't OADP available for OKD? I don't know the answer to that. We should probably bring the OADP folks on to look at that. OADP is, from my understanding, so take it with a grain of salt because Andrew doesn't know what I don't know about it. But in my head, I map it over to Valero with some special sauce. So it effectively packages up an application. So as a backup partner, our partners can come in and say, OADP, give me all of the resources for this application to back up. And it says, okay, here's all the YAML files, here's the container images, here's the PVCs, right? All of that stuff, instead of them having to do that independently. But we definitely should bring them on to have a chat about backup options. Like how the LVM for Snow looked in 4.12. Good news, our Hope 9. That was the next thing on my list. So the LVM CSI storage provider is now generally available. It is fully supported with single node OpenShift. I don't know if it's listed in here. Doesn't look like it, which is surprising. Maybe it's in the release notes.
Yeah, before in 4.11 it was there as tech preview where you could install the LVM operator. It was awesome. It's super easy to use. It gets a little tricky if you have any kind of like file system on there, so you may have to go and like actually run like a wipefs on it, like completely blast it out and then rerun the LVM operator. But it's super easy to configure. It was very nice.
Yeah. So it's generally available with 4.12. Note, however, that if you deployed it in 4.11 or earlier in its tech preview status, it is not compatible. You have to redeploy.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't, there is no upgrade path there, unfortunately. So just be aware of that if you're using it today, or hope none. But yeah, I thought that one was pretty cool. I saw a discussion on the internal Red Hat Home Lab chat around folks who were saying, historically they've run like Fedora or RHEL or something like that on their home server, and they'll use LVM on their home server and carve that up using KVM, carve out disks to give to KVM for home lab services. Gosh. So now with LVM, operator being GA, with OpenShift virtualization and all of the maturation that's happened there and all those things, there's a lot of folks internally who are considering like, maybe I can like deploy what is effectively a small footprint OpenShift. Again, single node OpenShift plus composable OpenShift to remove some things, plus all these other things. Now I've got local volume management. I can use OpenShift for my home lab server. I thought that was pretty cool. I may consider doing that myself, because I think it's, especially with single node OpenShift, it's super easy.
It was, I mean, like just the way doing it in 4.11 and having it available through the UI where you just go and you say, hey, I want to deploy this operator, and it just does it for you. And so like when you boot up, it's got the storage costs and everything ready. It's fantastic.
Let's see here. logical LVM storage. So yeah, just that easy.
Yeah.
I
And
need
you have
to
to set up like an LVM pool, but it's if you do it manually, you have to set up the LVM pool. It's not terribly difficult, but
Okay. Yeah, I definitely need to play with this one then. Maybe that'll be all my free time. I'll that's where I'll do that.
in the 26th and 27th hour of the day, you'll gotta get to
Yeah, yeah.
it.
Wait a minute. When is there a 25th hour, let alone a 26th and 27th?
25 is already there. It's included. So.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh, the last one I wanted to talk about here is the ingress firewall. Let me see if that is ingress firewall. No. Oh, wow. Okay. Let me find the slide that I had for it. Let's grab this guy and move you over. Oh, which window? Here. And how can I show this? Because I'm using two different users in my different browsers, which means that I can't combine them. Oh, I know what I can do. We'll just do this. Oops. That was the wrong button. So while I sit here and ponder how I've gotten myself into this situation where I'm trying to share a window that I can't share. Oh, I know. You think I don't present things for a living, right? Like, how am I this bad at presenting a simple
great,
slide?
man.
Yeah.
Going great.
There we go. So ingress firewall. So what this does is it allows you in a Kubernetes native way to effectively control the host level firewall. So, and you can do it on a per interface basis. So let's say a hypothetical situation, right? I've got a physical server deployed. It's got 4 interfaces. So I take 2 of those, I bond them together, and that's where the SDN runs. And I take the other 2 and I bond them together, and that's where my iSCSI or my NFS runs. So I can basically set and use this, and it's a tech preview feature today, but I can use this to create a firewall rule that basically blocks everything on that quote unquote storage network interface. So that even if, maybe I have a pod, a metal LB, or something like that goes in and is set up on that network interface. Because remember, they listen on all the network interfaces. It'll now get blocked by that host level firewall. It can do things like stop the host from replying to pings and all of the normal things that we would expect from a firewall being applied to our hosts. So to me, this is a pretty significant leap or jump in functionality and security when it comes to those types of things. Historically, we've just always assumed that, well, yeah, the firewall is always there. It's just transparent, right? Kubernetes, OpenShift manages it for us. Well, now we can take positive control and we can manage those rules. I don't know the sharp edges yet. So for example, can I accidentally lock myself out of my cluster? Like, if I create one of these rules and I globally apply like block all port 443, or 6443, would I accidentally lock myself out of the cluster? I don't know. Likewise, could I accidentally block, let's say that I've got a MySQL database deployed and it's using Metal LB. If I put in something that blocks port 3306, the MySQL port, am I going to suddenly block that? Or is there some integration there? Is there something that happens with services, services in particular? Routes always run through 80 and 443. So yeah, definitely some stuff to explore there. But to me, this one is, I'm keeping an eye on this because this is really cool.
Yeah, this is awesome. I'd come across this when I was going through the slides. I didn't realize that they were working on this. This is pretty amazing.
I think that's all I got, Johnny. And only 10 minutes passed when I was shooting for.
Yeah, no, we did good, man. We did good.
Let's see. Is there anything else in this list? Anything you wanted to bring up?
No, I mean everything else was just kind of like I had the pipelines as code where that went GA. And if you're not familiar with pipelines as code, if you've used GitLab CI or anything like that, you know you can put like a GitLab CI -YAML file in your repo, and then what happens is GitLab, as soon as anything happens in that repo, it'll pick up the changes and start the pipeline. So the pipelines as code is essentially the same thing where it allows you to put a configuration in your repo in your Git repository, and then it will spin up the pipeline runs and the task runs and all those things that you either would create your own task run for, your pipeline run for, or you'd have to go in and go through the interfaces and create it. So just a neat tool to help automate even further development in OpenShift using OpenShift pipelines.
And Johnny, I'll ask you the question because I don't remember if you were on the chat for the live stream last week. I don't think you were. I think you were on PTO.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody was asking there, like, why would they use pipelines as code? Like, what's cool about this? Why do I care about pipelines as code?
Yeah. So the reason why you'd want to use pipelines as code is because if you don't have it and you create your pipelines and your tasks and stuff like that in Tekton, then you either have to have a pipeline run or a task run to run that individual task, or a pipeline run to run that overall pipeline, or you need to go into the user interface and then fill out the context, the pipeline context, and then that'll create the pipeline run, which will trigger the pipeline. So what the pipeline as code does is it puts that that config in your repo. So when the repo gets brought in, it automatically generates the pipeline run that you need for that pipeline to execute. So that's why it's just automation.
Yeah, simplification, right? Because
Yeah.
the pipelines they're always quote unquote code, right? It's
Yeah.
YAML that's running and behind that defines the objects and behind the scenes. It's just a question of, does Johnny have to go in and define the pipeline and point it to the code repository so that it can pull in the code to build the application and go through the pipeline steps? Or does Johnny just point it at the code repository and it says, oh, look, there's a pipeline in here. Let me create the pipeline.
Yeah. And it does all of it for you. And if you look at like GitLab CI, to me is a good example because it's very similar, right? You have the GitLab CI file within the repo, and then that's essentially your pipeline. So that gets slurped in by GitLab, and then it generates your pipeline, and then off and away it goes.
Yeah, it's cool stuff. So let's see. So our Hope9, thank you for asking about Ortwin. He is busy. He and I are working together on a number of different things, both Red Hat Tech Exchange related, IBM Tech related, Bobby Carr related. Lots of cool stuff going on there. So for any Red Hatters, you will be seeing a lot of Ortwin's work during Tech Exchange. So we have brought up talking about service mesh again here on the stream. Johnny and I have brought it up. So we're probably looking at like late February, if not March, as being the earliest that we'll be able to do that. That's a combination of our schedule as well as Ortwin's schedule. So let's talk about what's happening over the next 6 or 8 weeks here on the live stream. So one, I'm sitting here looking at a list of, as I said before, no less than 6 things, 6 future topics, and service mesh is a 7th, that we'll be talking about as we go forward. So doing deep dives into things like, again, eBPF network observability, the security profile operator, topology-aware lifecycle manager in ACM. I did not know about this one, and I was blown away seeing that functionality inside of the What's New presentation. That's really awesome. I'm super excited about having that as a topic. So we've got a bunch of stuff that's planned. We don't have a precise schedule yet. We're figuring that out. But importantly, Johnny and I will both be globetrotting, I guess, Johnny.
That's right.
The first, or I guess the last week of January, the first week of February.
Yes.
Yeah, because we'll both be in Singapore. I do know that. And I will be in Dublin, and you'll be in Dallas. Yeah.
Yep.
So that is the February 1st and February 8th. We will not be streaming here on Ask an OpenShift Admin. And that's because we have work commitments and just too many time zones apart in a way to make it feasible. Normally when I'm gone at conferences, I don't mind doing the live stream, but it just won't work out this time. So
Yeah.
we will miss you all. It feels slightly frustrating that we've been gone for a month. We're back for 2 weeks. We're gone for 2 weeks, and then we're back. I don't think either one of us has any time away planned or any other things coming up that'll interrupt us. But yeah. So keep an eye on the schedule. As we get things cemented and solidified, we'll be updating the streaming calendar. We'll also be staging the streams. So if you are following the YouTube channels, you can always go in there and you'll see our stuff pop up inside of there. Yeah, plus 30. Yeah, I know. It's going to be warm. Johnny and I are both from the South, so we're used to that, just not this time of year.
Yeah. I mean, a little bit. It's like 75 right now, so I mean, a little bit.
Yeah, but it's not plus 30. Like 30C is it's a little on the warm side for
Yeah, that's up there.
shall we say healthy folks like me. Yeah, our Hope 9. It's funny you mentioned that. So the APAC folks, August Simonelli in particular, they're working on, and I think they had their first or maybe second instance now of a stream based in the APAC time zones. So I had briefly thought about doing something maybe out in that time zone while we're out there. But if I'm being honest, I don't know if time is going to allow. So looking at our schedule while we're out there, the days are super packed. Like I'm presenting sessions at Tech Exchange at 7:00 at night. So I don't know, or maybe it's 6:00. It's something like that. They're very long days. So I don't know if we'll be able to squeeze in something like that. If we do, it'll probably be an ad hoc. But that would be really cool. I'd love to include, that region in those time zones more. And Johnny and I have talked about that before. We just haven't been able to figure anything out.
Yeah.
All right, y'all. It's good to be back. Good to see everybody. Our Hope 9, Dave. Let's see. I'm looking at the list. Dwayne. Yeah, it's good to see everybody. Good to hear from you. Really, really appreciate you showing up and chatting with us, and all the questions, all the comments. As always, it's what we're here for. It's what we love.
Yep.
As always, don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. Again, if you're not watching us live, you can reach out, or if anything occurs to you, for any of the folks who are watching us live after the stream ends, feel free to reach out. Andrew.Sullivan@redhat.com or Johnny, JONNY @redhat.com. And we'll get back to you as soon as we can. I got nothing else, Johnny. Last words?
Nah, man, I'm good to go. Good to see you again. We'll see you next week.
Yeah. Feels good to be back in the saddle, right?
Indeed.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Have a great rest of your week.